This is an exploration of Dulce Et Decorum Est, the Wilfred Owen poem, which you might be studying in school, you might have to write about. What we're going to do, we're going to look through the poem and check that we know what's going on with the title, we know what's going on with the story, and then we're going to look at it again in more detail to annotate it through together. So before you start this lesson, make sure you've got a copy of the poem, a clean copy of the poem that you can write on. You can get one of those by Googling it and then cutting and pasting, and a pen, and that you've had a read through of it and that you've got a rough idea what you think's going on. So normally I'd say when we start with a poem, look at the title and see exactly what your expectations are. Now, this is a very, very useful thing for this poem, but you do need a bit of background knowledge. So the idea of Dulce Et Decorum Est is the start of a Horatian quotation, so a classical quotation. And it means that it's fitting and good to die for one's country, the whole quotation. And Owen is using this, ironically, he's using it as a criticism, not as a kind of sentiment, an idea that he really believes in. Because you realize that in the First World War, the young soldiers who were being sent to the front line, who were being killed in their millions, were the product of the British education system. And they would have had this kind of education where this patriotism or even going into jingoism, that kind of excessive patriotism that you see in the posters, the posters for recruitment also, you know, your country needs you and all that. That was kind of being used to persuade people to sign up. And what they were signing up for was sadly incredibly necessary, but was also absolutely awful. So Owen, kind of as somebody who'd experienced those conditions and seen the suffering, is taking that sentiment and twisting it and saying, you know, really, is it noble and good to experience this? So just bearing that in mind when we read the poem. Now, I'm not going to read it to you, but I am going to kind of summarize what's going on in each stanza. So our first stanza, we've got the speaker talking about soldiers from the First World War. And we can see that we've got that kind of inclusion there by that we. So he's looking around and he's saying, actually, these soldiers, they're bent over, they're like old beggars, they're like hags, they're trudging through mud. The flares, the kind of explosions and the distress flares and things are flaring up behind them. They're trying to get somewhere to rest. That line 4, our distant rest, you know, we began to trudge towards it. We're going to pick up on the idea of, you know, trudging, that kind of really laboring through. We get the idea that these men are marching asleep. These are not your bright-eyed soldiers who are eager to kind of do their best. These are people who are tired, absolutely exhausted, really suffering. You know, they've lost their boots, but their feet are bleeding, you know, bloodshot. If you think of shoeing a horse, these men, you know, their feet are bleeding. They're lame, so they're having difficulty walking, they can't see. And some of this is going to be literal. Some of this is going to be there will be men who are injured, and some of it is going to be sort of metaphorical, that, you know, they can't walk anymore, they feel like they can't walk anymore, or they can't face looking at anymore, as well as those people who may already have been blinded in part, right? Drunk with fatigue, so kind of it's like they are drunk with tiredness. They are not even registering the hoots, the kind of, you know, big and sounds of gas shells dropping behind them. So these are men generally who are in a really bad way as they're moving from the front line back to try and find somewhere to rest. And our speaker is among them. Then from that first stanza, we then move into the alert of a gas attack. Now, if you've done any background on any context on the First World War, you'll know that mustard gas, you'll know that, you know, this was the war where really kind of poisons were used as a mass large-scale weapon. So this was a gas attack, and this gas would kill you kind of very quickly, but well, relatively quickly, but very painfully. So the soldiers were equipped with gas masks. And if, you know, a gas attack was announced, then it was getting your gas mask on as quickly as possible to stop the gas being taken into your lungs, because once it was there, it was corrosive, it was acidic, so it would burn. And all of a sudden, you know, gas, quick, boys, they start clambering for their masks, getting them on just in time, but one man doesn't. And the speaker starts to look at what's going on with that man. He's floundering like he's on fire, or he's dying in lime. Again, lime, kind of that corrosive material. And the speaker says, I saw him drowning. You know, this is a man who's taken this gas into his lungs and he can't breathe. And all of a sudden we kind of change time, because, you know, this speaker is remembering this incident, but it's also like it's happening now, because he keeps thinking in his dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. So he keeps seeing this image of this poor man dying from the gas attack, and he can't help him. He can't do anything. And then the speaker addresses the reader more directly, you know, talks about, you know, if you've got these smothering dreams, if you've got these dreams that kind of threaten to suffocate you, you would also, or you could also be walking behind the wagon we flung him in. So they can't do anything to help this soldier. You know, he's dying from the gas. So they've just been able to pick him up and throw him in the back of one of the wagons. And they watch him suffering. They watch him kind of dying. And the rest of this kind of stanza down to, I think you can probably see it kind of in this grey bit, is this awful description of how he's dying, right? And we have this if up here, which is then picked up here. Okay, so sometimes these poems have a syntax, have a word order behind them that's complicated. So you have to kind of keep an idea in mind until you've got a lot further. So the idea here is basically, if in your dreams you've seen all of this suffering, then it comes down to say, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, right? So if you'd seen this, you wouldn't repeat that lie, right? And the lie is, it is honourable and good to die for one's country, that Latin that ends the poem. So really this poem moves from kind of looking at the suffering generally kind of the men and the impact and the consequence that it's had on this kind of collective group, and this group come to stand for all of the soldiers who are suffering this. And then we focus in on the death of one man, and by implication the impact it's had on the speaker, on that individual as well. So these two kind of experiences are brought together, and then it's thrown back out to challenge the reader, and therefore by extension to challenge the world, to challenge society. Say, if you'd been there, you wouldn't carry on saying, you know, that it's great to go out and fight. Okay. So having an idea of how it moves through, how it develops, how it progresses, allows you then to look at your annotation. And what I'm going to do now is as we annotate through, I'm going to kind of bring in a range of points. Some of them are going to be slightly more straightforward. Some of them are going to be more complicated. And really, if you're using this video to help you with your work at school, or kind of an essay or preparation for an assessment or so, take the points that you're happy with, take the ones that you can make your own, and you can say, yeah, I understand that and I can talk about it. Okay. So looking at it to start off with, we're going to talk about the connotations of the title. So we need that kind of recognition that this is taking kind of the, I suppose, the patriotic view from Horace, right? That it is noble and good to die for one's country. And it's applying it oh, let's spell that correctly. It's applying it critically, right? This isn't a kind of, yes, we're going to go along with that idea. This is going to be a challenge to it. So initially you might think that this is going to be something that is a poem promoting the war, but as soon as we start reading it, we realize that it's not like that. Okay, looking at different sense units. Okay, so when I'm reading this, I'm going to look for the full stop, first of all. And I can see we've got our first full stop there. So I know that that's going to be all one sentiment, but we might be able to break it down to kind of look for little ideas within that longer clause. So bent double like old beggars under sacks, right? So we're straight into the action. There is an immediacy of this description, right? We're not given any kind of introduction to where we are. Straight away, we're focused on the awful condition of these men. And we've got the kind of plosive alliteration there, which is kind of looking at the force of plosive alliteration, is that alliteration on P's, B's, and D's, which kind of goes to the violence and the kind of destruction of the situation, of the condition they're in. And our simile here compares these young men, these young soldiers, to old and kind of damaged people with nothing, right? So, you know, it challenges the stereotype of the soldier straight away. You know, if you'd been looking at these posters that were showing, you know, platoons or regiments of people going off to war, kind of marching proudly, singing, you know, this is a very, very different impression. We're taking the idea of, I suppose they've been prematurely aged, right? Premature aging there. They are old before their time. They're sort of damaged. They've, you know, this military equipment that they're meant to have has been reduced to sacks, right? And this is really quite simple language. Oh, there's a reminder on my computer telling me to do something. So, you know, there's nothing fancy, there's nothing elaborate about this. It's all very kind of basic and kind of brutal. We pick up this consonant here on the K with the knock-kneed. And again, this is the condition of them. If you're knock-kneed, your legs are banging together. You know, they're in bad, poor physical condition. And we get that K again, coughing. So we can almost have the consonants on that harsh K. That sound, mimicking the coughing, mimics coughing. Okay. Trying to keep this kind of relatively easy to read. Sorry about the handwriting. We cursed, coughing like hags, so a simile, right? And if you're somebody who's really aiming for those top level marks, you're going to be looking to pick up patterns, right? And now all of a sudden I'm discovering that we've got this pattern of, there are two similes quite close together, really, you know, and we can make the point that really he's trying to describe the soldiers as anything but soldiers. You know, these are not, these are so far removed from who they should be or what they should be, that really we've got all of this imagery early on to say, look, these soldiers are not, they don't look like soldiers anymore. So that build-up of simile is there. We aligns the speaker with the suffering. Okay, he is part of this group of men who are cursing and trudging. And we get an assonance here. So you can see where I'm kind of going. That assonance, that's repetition of a vowel sound, okay? It's giving the kind of sense of effort there, the sound, as they are really kind of having to push themselves forwards. And cursing, obviously, is you can contrast that with the, I suppose, with the propaganda, especially if you need to write about context. You know, the propaganda in the First World War was this publicity to make men believe they were signing up for this, you know, glorious, you know, and good to die for one's country. This is very different. Cursing is kind of, you know, negative, is broken, is beaten down. And that sludge, the ground is sticky, is difficult to move through. So we have all of that kind of difficulty. And we start to think, okay, we've got this difficulty. Is that being reflected anywhere else in the form and structure of the poem? Well, I'm starting to notice that we've got caesura and end stops. There's quite a lot of them in those opening 2 lines. So caesura here, okay, and that's any punctuation in the middle of a line. It can be a comma, full stop, dash, question mark, whatever. Any punctuation in the middle of a line. And an end stop is a stop at the end, right? So we've got this kind of stop, start, stop, start. So the form of the poem here is helping us understand the difficulty of the men moving forward. You know, they kind of go forward a bit and stop, forward a bit and stop. Okay. So it's worth commenting on that from a form and structure point of view. We go back to our stanza. It says, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Okay, so it's worth commenting on the haunting flares, the idea that the men can't get away from the war zone, right? Almost that there's a kind of supernatural kind of element to it, and they're having to kind of turn away from it. You know, they can't escape, and rest is distant. Okay, it's not, you know, we're just going to kind of off shift, as it were. This is a big journey they're having to make, and they're not making it quickly because we've got this trudge, which rhymes with sludge. Okay, so there's that connection there from that full end rhyme getting through this particular ground. You know, it's really difficult. You probably noticed by now that we've got alternate full rhymes, so sacks and backs. We're going to pick up boots and hoots and blind and behind. That's a pattern that's kind of repeated throughout the poem. And it could, you know, the kind of alternate rhyme, or we could even say alternate end rhyme to make it clear that we know that this is rhyme at the end rather than there's any rhyme in the middle of the lines. So the alternate end rhyme can kind of go to the idea that they're trapped, that there's no escape. You know, it's almost as if they're trapped in the rhyme scheme there. And we can pick up, I guess, the sibilance of distant rest, towards distant rest. And that makes it seem like this promised kind of respite, this promised break is really a long way away. You know, it's almost like a kind of distant dream, that whispering idea. We then have this simple kind of sentence with a metaphor here. Men marched asleep. We know they're not actually asleep, but think of the connotations of being asleep. You know, you're unaware, you're kind of not functioning, you're not thinking properly. It's as if you're kind of completely distanced from all of your surroundings. So men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshot. And this idea is, first of all, you know, kind of brutal. You know, the idea that you've not got the right footwear, that they're kind of having to carry on, that they're injured. But we get this idea that the men are kind of aligned to animals. I mentioned before that, you know, shoeing the horse, these men are shod with blood. So, you know, if you've lost your boots, you're just wearing blood over your feet. And that idea of the animal kind of imagery, animals go lame if they can't walk properly. So everybody, this is kind of extreme, is suffering and can't walk. And everybody's blind. And we said that was either, some of them, it will be literal in terms of damage to their sight, but actually some of them will be, all of them, it's metaphorical, the idea that they don't want to see, they can't bear to see any more of what's going on around them. Drunk with fatigue, so kind of drunk with tiredness, they are intoxicated, so poisoned by exhaustion. Deaf even to the hoots, and hoots is a strange word because that implies excitement. If you hoot at something and you're a person, then it's kind of this whoop of joy. But these are the hoots of gas shells. So there's the element of personification there, that these kind of excited whistling in, kind of exclaiming shells are coming in. But then they drop softly behind. So the kind of ambush idea by these excited kind of weapons that are betraying them, almost kind of coming in and kind of getting them and poisoning them. Now, that's your first stanza, and you can see we've got a lot to write about. I also want to just pick up the form and structure again, really, to kind of say, well, hang on, what's going on in terms of the meter? So generally, this poem is iambic pentameter. And if you haven't come across iambic pentameter before, or if you're thinking, oh, I know that and I've forgotten it, way of remembering it is the kind of clue is in the phrase. And iamb here is a unit of language, and it's 2 syllables. And those 2 syllables go dee-dum. Okay, your stress is on the second syllable, dee-dum. There are other ways of describing things that go dum-dee, for example, or dum-dee-dee, or anything. There's a whole technical language out there if you're interested. But iambic means that it is using iambs. So generally, it's using this dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. Okay. Pent means 5. So this is telling us there are 5 iambs in the meter, in the rhythm of this poem. So you've got lines that go dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. So roughly speaking, if you're writing in pure iambic pentameter, you've got 10 syllables per line and they follow that stress pattern. You don't read it out dee-dum, 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 because otherwise it would sound weird. But it kind of follows that heartbeat beat. It follows that kind of pattern. Now, Owen has roughly used iambic pentameter in this poem. So I'm expecting if all of a sudden you're sitting there counting out syllables and kind of going, hang on, not only are there not the right number of syllables in some lines, but I'm not hearing this dee-dum, dee-dum, dee-dum beat. He's manipulating it a little bit. Now, it might be that you're super interested in meter and how this works, in which case there's loads of analysis on the internet in terms of this, but I'm just going to pick up the main points. First of all, it's irregular iambic pentameter. You're not getting this whole dee-dum, 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 dee-dum pattern all the time. And there's a reason for that. And the second thing is that, manipulating it is really kind of as skillful as not sticking to it, because we're going to look at where the manipulations are. So if you take it that, you can try and find which lines are regular, the big ones that I would really pick out here is line 7, this drunk with fatigue thing goes all over the place there. That is not a dee-dum, 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 dee-dum line. So you can talk about the irregularity or the break from iambic pentameter, actually meaning that, it's like the meter is all over the place, like the men are all over the place. So, the irregularity of the meter in line 7 could reflect the condition of the men. And then in line 8, we're also a syllable short, which gives us this moment here before the gas attack on the next stanza. Okay, so, we've got here the irregularity in the meter, showing the kind of distress and the fact that the men are completely incoherent, the men are all over the place, moving to this short line where you have this additional beat for the anticipation, that moment before the attack. Now, I'm going to pause this video there so it's not too long for anybody to kind of do in one go. And I am going to do a part 2, possibly even a part 3. So look out for that and we'll take it step by step. Okay.